Welcome to our weekly national news conference. I'm Sandy Close, Director of Ethnic Media Services. The pandemic brought home the perils of being trapped in the digital divide. Just how much access to the internet has become a key determinant for education, healthcare, work, even public safety. Today's briefing focuses on efforts to close the digital divide and the growing demand for universal broadband as a fundamental human right. Now, I'm really pleased to turn the conference over to today's moderator and briefing co-coordinator, author, and journalist, Pilar Marrero. Thanks, Pilar.
Thank you, Sandy. Welcome, everyone. This is a topic that we had not touched on in the past, but that it became really obvious was a huge problem, especially during the pandemic. So we want to talk about things that are going on in a push to move towards this universal broadband that is sorely needed. Our first speaker is going to give us more of the national overview of what's happening, and that is Angela Siefer, Executive Director of the National Digital Inclusion Alliance. Welcome, Angela.
Thank you, Pilar. Thank you, Sandy, for having me. So I'm in Columbus, Ohio. I'm very thrilled to be joining you all today. NDIA is a national organization. We've been doing this work about 7 years. We are a unified voice for digital inclusion around the country. One of the first things we did when we started NDIA was to create definitions for digital equity and digital inclusion. Digital equity is the goal. This is individuals, communities having full access to information communication technologies to do whatever they need to do. And then digital inclusion is the how. These are the activities that would get us to the digital equity. Digital inclusion work in the United States has been very local. It's a grassroots kind of activity, for most part because there hasn't been any money for this. There was nobody to tell you what to do if there was no money for it. So that means it really developed from the ground. And those activities are affordable home broadband. So sometimes this means paying for somebody's internet service. Sometimes it means negotiating for lower rates. Sometimes it means building something that's cheaper. It also means affordable devices in the home, right? And that meet your needs. A lot of times the lower income household will only have a mobile device, and that is insufficient today. And it also means digital literacy skills and training. So being able to go somewhere to receive that support that you need to build your skills, and having somebody to turn to when you have a question. During the pandemic, we saw more organizations doing digital inclusion work, or starting to do it, than ever before. And we saw a shift in not only providing in-person class types of trainings to households and individuals that needed digital literacy support, but providing it on the phone, online, not always in a class environment. Also, there's been more one-on-one kind of support. The work that CETF does, that you'll hear about briefly or shortly, and then the work that NDIA does is both that on the ground, helping those practitioners talk to each other and receive that kind of peer-to-peer sharing of best practices that we all need, but then also taking what we hear from folks locally and influencing public policy. And right now, as you would expect, since there are so many more folks who recognize and understand the digital divide than ever before, we actually have some attention amongst policymakers. And that is incredibly exciting for folks who've been doing this work for years. The exciting part is that in this infrastructure package, we do expect there to be, let's all assume the infrastructure package actually happens. So if it happens, there will be money for digital equity work, and that will be incredible. What we know for sure is that digital equity work happens locally, and it happens by trusted institutions. So if the organization that's providing that support that guides someone to choosing a low-cost offer, to helping them get a device, to teaching them digital literacy or pointing them to digital literacy resources, if that voice isn't trusted, sometimes the person that an organization is trying to reach just says no and turns around and walks away. And so that trust is really essential. And I think that's part of how and why we're seeing more organizations who do other work, right? They work on housing, they work on new resident kind of programs. We see those organizations starting to do digital equity work, and they're doing it because they can't meet their original mission. So say their original mission is housing, and they couldn't meet that original mission during the pandemic because they couldn't talk to and interact with the populations that they wanted to be interacting with. And that has caused a fabulous widening of who it is that does this kind of work. And that's also super important because of this trust factor that I've mentioned. Technology is intimidating, it's confusing. The government right now has a subsidy for internet service, and we're hearing of some folks saying, no, I don't want it. Why? Well, it sounds like a scam. Doesn't free internet sound like a scam, right? You're like, no, that must be a scam. But then also, do you trust the internet service provider? Privacy, safety concerns, all kinds of reasons why someone who's eligible would say no to something that's free. Is it less than what I actually need, for example? So having these trusted institutions be engaged in the work is super important. It's essentially the human side to the digital divide. So what we're seeing in Congress right now is this recognition, right? So if we get the infrastructure package, broadband's definitely in it. There's no longer any question as to whether or not broadband is part of infrastructure. You all have heard some of the stories about what is infrastructure, right? So they've definitely nailed down broadband itself. The technology is considered infrastructure. So if there's an infrastructure bill that gets passed, broadband is definitely inside of it. We also know that inside that language for broadband is $2.75 billion for the Digital Equity Act. So the contents of the Digital Equity Act are inside the broadband portion of the infrastructure bill that's not actually out yet. So inside that Digital Equity Act is funds for states to conduct digital equity planning. That's incredible. States have not done digital equity planning. Some of them have digital equity plans as part of their broadband plans, but nobody has a standalone plan yet. Wisconsin has a fabulous start, and it might even, have most of the pieces, but we don't know if anyone else who's really has been able to dive into it at that depth. And then it has money for implementation of those state plans. That's amazing too, right? And then there's a separate pot where there's money that it's competitive national grants for this kind of work. All of that is incredible. And that is on top of possible additional money that would extend the emergency broadband benefit. So quick note about the emergency broadband benefit. It's currently at a $50 subsidy per month for broadband service. There's an eligibility list. Right now, it's pretty broad because it's anybody who's been impacted economically by the pandemic. If a household's already using the Lifeline service that's run by the FCC, that makes them automatically eligible. So it is a really valuable subsidy that's out there. We don't know how long it will last because we don't know when the money will run out. But if this extension occurs, it's going to last a lot longer. So I think what we're seeing right now is that potential money from the federal government, but also previous stimulus packages already allow for the monies that go to the state and local governments to be spent on digital equity. And that was a huge win because we haven't really seen that in the past, where money that's kind of has a broad category, the digital equity was included in that. So for those who are doing digital equity work on the ground, I encourage them to talk to local and state governments because those local and state governments have access to funding right now from the American Rescue Plan. And there's no reason not to ask for some of that money to continue this work. Okay, Pilar, I'm handing it back to you.
Okay, thank you, Angela. Can you give our reporters the idea of how bad the problem is and what are the areas of the country that have the highest rate of I don't know, unconnected people. I don't know how you call it.
No, this is a really good clarification. Thank you, Pilar, for the question. That the reasons that someone might not have internet in their home, one reason is that the infrastructure doesn't exist, right? It's just not there. Your only option might be satellite, and that is crazy expensive and unreliable. But then the next reason that you may not have internet in your home is that it's expensive. The infrastructure might exist, but you're like, look, I'm not paying $70 a month. That is just not in the budget. And then another reason you may not have it in your home is that it might be there and maybe you can afford it, but you're not sure how to use it, or you're not sure you trust it, security, privacy concerns, right? All kinds of reasons when folks would be like, not doing it. So there's a multitude of reasons. And sometimes that availability question of whether it's there kind of gets confused with, well, it's there, but people aren't signing up for it. Prior to the pandemic, we knew that that this was happening, but a lot of policymakers were not aware of that. They just assumed that it was only a rural problem. This is not just a rural problem. This is a rural, urban, suburban, tribal. This is everybody. And the reason it's everybody is because the infrastructure might be there, but it might not meet the needs of the population that's there, or they may not be able to afford it, or they may not know how to use it. So we need to address all of those barriers, and it won't surprise folks to hear, this issue is very much connected to poverty. So the lower one's income, the less likely one is to have an internet connection in one's home.
In terms of numbers, is there, we reporters like numbers. So.
So the numbers we have are from the US Census prior to the pandemic. So take that for
maybe worse now.
It's probably not worse. It might actually be slightly better because there was a lot of efforts to get people connected at the height of when kids were going back to school and school was online. So prior to the pandemic, 36 million US households do not have an internet connection in their homes. So be very careful. I'm not saying that they don't have it available. I'm saying they don't have an internet connection in the home. And when I say that, I mean wireline connection, and the word wireline means cable, DSL, or fiber. So mobile phones, I don't even want to count mobile phones because they all come with data plans. How can you rely upon a source of internet that has a data cap on it, right? So 36 million US households, nothing. Of those 36 million US households, 26 million are urban, 10 million are rural. So all of these households are important. I don't want to dismiss the availability issue. It is really important, but also want to really confirm this is the bigger number piece of this is urban.
And yet I don't see a lot of talk about this. People talk about the rural, areas don't have the availability of the infrastructure, but then so many people in our cities don't have access to this. Talk a little bit about how the pandemic may have helped open up a little bit.
It definitely drew attention to the issue. When there were news stories showing kids doing their homework in a Taco Bell parking lot, how does that not break anyone's heart, right? Seeing kids do homework in a parking lot, in a car, not in a car, still, it's a parking lot. It is not the best place to be learning. So I think that reality drew lots of folks to the issue. And there's a greater understanding that it's not just an availability of the infrastructure issue, but we still encounter individuals who think that the problem is really about rural availability. And we want to make sure to clarify, yes, there's a problem with rural availability, but there's also a significant problem with affordability, being able to afford that internet service and having the support to learn digital skills in order to be able to make full use of it. And so that education issue is not the only reason the internet's important, but what the pandemic did was the education of young people not being able to go to school that drew attention. And then we're able to expand from there and say, oh, it's also about work. It's also about health. It's about connecting to your families. It's really everything, right? Survive today without it? No.
Okay, Joe Garbanzos, you want to ask a question?
Unmute. So thank you very much. This is a terrific session, a comment and a question. Thank you for mentioning the emergency broadband benefit. That's a timely program, and there's not a whole lot of participation. I think the more we can promote it, the better, so people understand what it is and the value of a subsidy, because that money is not going to be there forever. The question is to our speaker, Angela. You know, the broadband issue is, as you know, pretty dense, right? Because you have affordability, but at the end of the day, the question is fiber optics in terms of getting people to access better speed, higher speed, because a lot of people are using this for health, education, and entertainment. So the way it's set up right now, you have monopoly at the last mile, where the cable companies are not investing in upping the bandwidth to have access to more robust information, if you will. My question is your organization weighing in on that? And are you open to collaborating with other organizations, perhaps? Because there is synergy in number, you know? That's the question. Thank you.
We are, and we were supportive of the bill that recently passed. I assume Sunny will talk about this. The bill that recently passed in California. So you all, again, sorry for anybody who's not from California on this call. The ones who are from California, there's a lot happening in California. And I'll let Sunny get into the details of that bill. But yes, we are supportive of faster, more robust, affordable internet. There are lots of partner organizations out there who are working on the idea that lots of populations do not have access to the robust internet service that they need. Our particular view of all of it is to really think about our most vulnerable populations and to keep pressing the fact that when those new networks are built, they need to be affordable. And affordable at a market rate is not the same as affordable for a low-income family. So with networks that currently exist and new networks being built, we need to make sure that it's affordable at a market rate, but also that there are subsidies, or that internet service provider cuts that price down to $10, $15 a month, right? Something that is much more reasonable than whatever the market rate, because the possibility of a market rate getting that low, kind of thin, right? Because you got to pay for the broadband itself. So yes, we're hugely supportive of the idea that we need to make sure that we have the most robust internet that there is, right? Like, we can't build networks for yesterday, because we know that technology is going to keep changing and our needs for that are just going to keep increasing.
Thank you, Angela. I'm going to move on to our second speaker. If you can stick around, that would be great. We may have more questions for you in a little bit. Thank you so much. And let's hear from Érica Del Toro. She runs a parent university program at Cal State Fresno. Érica, tell us how important internet access and literacy is for parents.
Hello, everyone. And again, thank you for having me. My name is Érica Del Toro. I'm part of the Parent University program through Fresno State University. Part of what we do and our goal is to be able to offer the opportunity for parents to have those computer skills. We also help them with financial management skills. And now with the pandemic, we added on social and emotional support. As you guys can imagine, with the pandemic, school systems were, greatly impacted by that, which means our program need was, through the roof. We had a lot of school districts reach out to us. So a lot of what was happening with the students being at home, they didn't know how to manage their devices. They didn't know how to use their devices. They weren't familiar with the programs that they had to use now for school. And that means the parents weren't either. So part of what we did during the pandemic was not only help the parents and give them that support with the stressors of having their students struggle at home, but also learn how to use the device themselves. That way they can better help their kids. We also help them, learn those programs that each district had the students use for their schoolwork, how to check their grades and things like that. As part of the social and emotional part, we kind of did like an open, safe environment for parents. Of course, all, confidential and up to them to participate or just listen in, but just to talk about, the stress that they were dealing with this change, as well as the stress that the kids go through, because it also affects them. So we had some parents kind of stress about, how, it just gets to the point where it's a little bit too much for them being cooped up at home. So we just kind of worked on with professionals, different ideas, different activities that they can do to kind of step away from just being teacher mode. Because of course, being a parent is, awesome, but then now you're playing teacher as well. So how does that impact you and how to do that? A lot of positive outcomes from those classes we did during the pandemic. A lot of these parents actually continued their education, and they shared that with us that thanks to our program, they were encouraged to now go get their GED and go to college and find those online classes because they lost the fear of being online or touching a computer alone. So that was very interesting and very fulfilling for us as part of our program, because we do want to help parents as a whole with their families, but we also want to encourage them not to forget about themselves, right? And a lot of the issue was internet access, like Suzanne said, low-income homes, Latinos, and a good thing about our program, we do try to accommodate to the communities that we offer our program to. So we do offer our program in different languages, and we do connect them with whatever services are around their area to get that low-income opportunity to have internet access or free devices to use.
Thank you, Érica. And we're almost to the end of the conference, and there's a couple of questions in the chat that I think go back to one important issue. Khalil says, broadband deployment in the US has been predicated on privately owned cable companies getting contracts from municipalities for X number of years. Where are the initiatives for public ownership by municipalities and cities? And then from Oni, a small country like Latvia has free internet. It is mind-boggling that the US, one of the wealthiest countries, could not even provide internet, especially to underserved communities. I'm just going to throw this out to Angela. Can the United States actually do this? Can we have more public internet? Can we have more governments offer internet? Is that doable?
Oh yeah, it's doable and it's happening right now. The link that I shared in the chat is an organization called Institute for Local Self-Reliance, and they maintain a listing of all the local governments and other publicly owned entities that are building and managing their own networks. It's definitely something we've seen more interest in during the pandemic, that the local individuals and elected officials want to solve their problem. And one way they go at solving it is by doing it themselves. There are also more public-private partnerships where they're not doing it all their own, they're doing it with a partner. And in the legislation that we're about to see, it doesn't keep, so right now in some states there are laws that keep those the public entities from using their own funds to build networks, and that's not going to change in this upcoming legislation. But what we are seeing is a welcoming of public entities to apply for the grant funds and to build networks. So it's kind of it's a balance between the incredible power of the internet service providers. So I think those two questions are actually very much related. They have to do with that incredible power of internet service providers in the United States. The base thing to understand is that in the United States, providing internet service is a commodity. It's not a public utility. Nobody has any legal standing. One might say morally it's a utility, but legally it's not a utility, right? But morally it should be. And so, and the reason that it's established like that is because in the United States, those internet service providers have been making so much money that they spend millions of dollars on lobbyists to make sure that their needs are met. And so the pushback from organizations like CETF and NDIA is that we need to think about the communities and the individuals first, not think about the internet service providers first. And in some of the states where laws have been restrictive, it's because they were thinking of the stakeholders as being the internet service providers. We need to change that so that the stakeholders are our communities and our residents, not a corporation.
I have a quick question for Érica. I'm wondering, in your experience, how many kids quit school because they don't have access to internet?
On my end, a lot of my parents expressed, especially those going into college, starting, with the pandemic and everything online, they were choosing to wait. And then as far as the ones who were currently transitioned to being at home, doing online school, their grades went down. It took a lot of asking the districts to offer some kind of tutoring service or some kind of guidance, some kind of help, because even just one-on-one opportunities with the teachers was very limited. So it came down really to a lot of the parents turning into that teacher mode and understanding that, it just depends on what the districts were able to offer. It was a change for everybody. So definitely grades were impacted and definitely a change of mind for those starting college for the first year.
Thank you so much. Let me toss it to Sandy Close.
Well, I'm thrilled, and I'm thrilled to have this invitation from both these terrific organizations to join forces. Now, that is like sending a love letter because for so many years, we have tried to get, for example, tech companies to even run recruitment advertising in ethnic media. They complain they don't have access to enough diverse applications, but they do no advertising in the media that could get them. And we just thought, I guess I have to say, this opens a window. It is extremely exciting. And the call to action for us is to raise awareness of digital equity as a civil and human right. And I think you all the speakers have done a terrific job elevating that message. Thank you very much. And we accept the invitation to join forces.